Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A man had a parrot that he was trying to teach to talk. And he sat in front of the parrot and would repeat words over and over. But the parrot always turned away from him and paid no attention to him. And he couldn't get anything across to the parrot. So he had an idea. He brought a big mirror in front of the parrot. And the parrot was looking at itself in the mirror. And the man stood behind the mirror and began to talk to the parrot in the same way as he was trying to teach him to talk face to face. But now that the parrot thought another parrot was talking to him, the parrot was listening, and the parrot learned how to repeat words. It learned how to say things, and it picked up what the man was trying to do. Now, the parrot could say words, but he didn't understand the meaning. He could repeat, but that was all he could do. He could say what he heard, but he didn't understand what was behind the mirror. He didn't understand the intelligence that was behind the mirror because he wasn't equipped for that. Like that, the sheikh is a mirror for us. And we look at the mirror and we see a man. And this man talks to us. And we pick up the words from this man. But unless we realize that these words are deeper than the manifestation that we see, and they come from a place that's deeper than the vision that we see, we're only going to be repeating words. So until we get to the point where we understand where the words from the sheikh actually come from, we aren't going to learn about the truth. So it's not enough that we hear and we listen. We have to take that next step, to go beyond and to become deeper into understanding what's going on, so that we understand not only from the visual level, from the external level, but we begin to understand from the internal level. And we have to learn that what the sheikh is connected to and the words that come through that connection also exists within us. And we have that same connection. And what the sheikh's words need to do for us is invigorate that connection that exists within us, so that we become in tune with that same reality that the sheikh is in tune with. There was once a king, and a king said to one of his ministers, I want jnana, I want wisdom, and I want you to bring me wisdom. And I'm going to give you 30 days to do it. And if you can't bring me wisdom within 30 days, I'm going to have you hung. Now, you're the wisest of my ministers, so I've put this on your plate, and I expect you to respond to me. Well, the minister started thinking about this, and he thought about it and thought about it. and he became distraught because he couldn't figure out how to bring wisdom to the minister. He wasn't sleeping at night. He wasn't eating well. And every day when he would go home, he would pace. And the minister had an 8-year-old daughter. And she noticed something was wrong with her father. And she asked him, "Father, what's wrong?" And he wouldn't tell her. The days went by, and it was now down to 29 days. And he said, "Well, I might as well tell her, it can't hurt." So he told his little girl that the king had asked him to bring him wisdom. And if he didn't do it within 30 days, he would be hung. And the minister said to his little girl, "I've been worried about who's going to take care of you and what's going to happen to you after I die, because I certainly can't do this. I can't take care of this." And the little girl said, "Father, don't worry. I have an idea. Take me with you tomorrow when you go to see the king, and hopefully we can resolve this situation." So he's thinking to himself, if I take her, he won't only kill me, he'll kill her too. What am I doing? And finally he decided to listen to her because he had no other options. And he took her to the king. And in the king's chambers, it was lined with ministers, and he came in. And the king says to him, "Well, have you found a way to give me wisdom?" As he says this, his little girl starts screaming at the top of her lungs in a shrill, piercing voice, "Tie me up, tie me up, tie me up," screaming and screaming. And the king looks at her and directs 2 of his ministers, go tie her up to that pole over there. And they tie her up. As soon as she's tied up, the minister returns to the king returns to questioning the minister, but the little girl starts screaming again, untie me," in the same shrill, loud voice. And the king says to his ministers, "Go untie her." After they untie her, she holds on to the pole as if she's still trapped in it. And she starts screaming, "Release me, release me, release me." And the king looks at her and he says, "You're free to go." And then she turns to the king and she says, "You are also free to go. And the fact that you hold on to your kingdom and you keep your kingdom as the most sacred thing in your life, this is what keeps you from finding wisdom. And until you let go, even though you're not tied, until you let go, even though you're not held in place, you can never find wisdom. You can never find the truth." And the king was a little taken back by the little girl. And he thought about it. And he realized that because of all of the thought that he gave to his kingdom, and all of the thought that he gave to all of the various things that go on in the kingdom, and all of the worrying that took place because of these things, he was absolutely tied and unable to move from his place. And the only way to be released was to give everything up. And he looked at the little girl and he said, "You're wiser than all of my ministers." So he gave her father the role of king until his son grew up to be able to be king. And he said, "I'm going into the woods in order to find freedom." And the little girl said, "I'll go with you." And he said, "Well, not yet. Wait until you're at a certain age. Then if you want to come, you can come too." So here we are. We are all tied through certain attachments that we have to certain things in this world. Each one of us is tied in a different way. Each one of us has different attachments, different ways of seeing the world, and different ways of reacting to the world. Now, all of us have listened to wise words, and all of us have taken in these words, and many of us can repeat these words. But until we get to the point that we understand where these words come from and what these words mean and how they affect us internally and what the truth of these words mean, they're merely words. It's like the parrot who, when he sees somebody come into the house, screams robber, whether it's the owner of the house, whether it's a guest, or whether it's a robber, you get the same reaction. We need to go beyond words and go to the truth in reality. And the truth is not going to be found in our external relationships and in our reaction to external relationships. Somehow, we need to go beyond relying on external relationships, externalities, the things on the outside of us, to decree the state that we're in. So we believe, when we don't truly understand, that that which happens around us is what determines our peace or our sorrow or our happiness or our sadness. As long as this is what we believe, we are going to continue on the roller coaster ride of happiness and sorrow, of praise and blame, of euphoria and depression. As long as we are based in what's external, there is no choice but to be involved that way. Why? Because everything that is external has a limit. Everything that's external has a time to it. Everything in this world that was brought into the world is going to die and leave the world. And death brings grief. Well, just as there is death to the body, and there is a time for the body, there's also a death to happiness and a time for happiness. In the same way, there is a death to sorrow and a time for sorrow. All of these things will disappear, every single one of them. And as we attach to these things that are external to us, and as they disappear, we go through our reactions to those things. We go through our trauma with these things. And that trauma is mental, it's physical. There's lots of different traumas that we have in the world. My teacher, for instance, over the last number of years of his life, was ill, and he suffered from difficulty in breathing. He had something that the doctors called emphysema, and it made his life difficult. but he didn't live his life in his difficulty. He lived his life outside of the realm of his body. He lived his experience outside of the realm of his body. So you never saw him in a state where he got angry because of his condition, where he got upset because of his condition, because would rail about the nature of his condition. He would just go on with what he was doing and carry whatever he had to carry. But it didn't change his internal reaction to things, because he was involved with things that were deeper than the external nature of what appeared for all of us to be able to see with our eyes. He saw things in a different way from a different place. He realized that what we were dealing with this body was a temporary manifestation, just as he realized that all the incidents that we were dealing with and all of the separate and various traumas that we're involved in that come into our lives, all of the different sorrows, all of the different happinesses, all of the highs and lows, all of the praise and blame, also had a time limit, and they were going to pass. Now, what happens to those of us who have trouble understanding the passage of things, we get stuck within the inclination and the anxiety of resolving situations whose time for resolution hasn't come. There's an expression, there's your time. Well, I think I've got it wrong, but it's basically there's your time and then there's God's time, and things aren't going to happen in your time. They're going to happen in God's time. But we're anxious about things happening in our time, not in God's time. And that level of anxiety as to resultant outcomes is one of the factors that causes trauma within our being. It causes anger within our being because we don't have the inner patience to let whatever is going on pass. We become hysterical about the moment. We become hysterical about the fact that a resolution hasn't come into place in the way that we expect that resolution to come into place. So how do you relieve yourself of that anxiety? How do you relieve yourself of the inability to resolve a situation? The words are simple. Detach yourself from the situation. The reality is that for each of us, because of our internal magnetism to worldly situations, we're caused trauma by them. Now, if you've ever played with magnets, it takes effort to pull them apart. And the stronger the magnets, the more the effort is involved in pulling them apart. And if you can get them far enough apart, they won't jump back together. But if you only pull them apart a little bit, they'll jump back together. So we, when dealing with trauma, pull things apart a little bit, but then they jump back together. We pull things apart a little bit and they jump back together. We need to take one of the magnets and put it in another room, and the other magnet in a room far away from it, and then there won't be a juncture for that same anxiety anymore. So we need to understand that we have compulsive reactions to things that have been ingrained and trained within us through our relationships with our parents, our peers, our school, and our usual interaction with people. For instance, if we had a parent who became frustrated quickly and started to scream and holler, we develop that kind of a reaction to our own inner frustration. We don't have patience to allow matters to resolve itself. And this has to do with another mind trick. And I've run into people like this. Instead of understanding that things have relative importance and that things are critical and some are not critical, we see every difficult situation as critical. And this kind of a mindset that can't differentiate between what's critical and what's not critical is constantly in trauma, because they're constantly dealing with crisis, because everything that happens in their external world is a crisis. For instance, road rage. You're driving and somebody cuts you off. The rage that some people go through because of that incident is beyond explanation, but not only did it happen, it happens often. And people have even pulled guns and shot people because of road rage. Yet it's a temporary moment that if you let it go, it has absolutely no consequence, but your reaction can cause immeasurable consequences to your existence. So, slowly, we have to understand that some things are less important than others. And we don't have to react. We don't have to do anything. We can just let them go. Eventually, we'll get to the point where everything fits into that category of being let go. And everything is of no moment, because we begin to understand that all of external matters have limits, will disappear, will die, will be no longer relevant, and we can move on from that. But as long as we hold on, we will have the difficulty that comes with holding on. That's why in the story of the king who wanted wisdom, it was about a king, because the king has the greatest power, the greatest wealth, the greatest everything. He's the king. So he has to let go of more than anybody else. Why? Because he has more than anybody else. But Allah doesn't expect more from the king than he expects from the beggar. Allah expects the king to give up everything, and he expects the beggar to give up everything. Do you think that the magnetic connection the king has to his kingdom, or the connection that the beggar has to his 4 coins, is any different in its veracity, is any different in its strength of attachment, is any different in the trauma that it causes the person individually, in the difficulty that it causes the person individually? There is no difference. We need to understand that. And when we can see that there is no difference, we can then begin to put everything in appropriate perspective. The problem that we have is we don't have appropriate perspective. We talk about reality, but we live in the world. We read about reality, but we live in the world. We define reality, but we live in the world. When will we begin to live in reality? When will we give up the world and accept reality as the truth, as the truth, and be able to give up our attachments to the world that keep us in trauma, that keep us in difficulty, that keep us in anger, that keep us in jealousy, that keep us in all of the traits that don't belong to Allah. When will we make that break? When will we come to the point where we give up living in a make-believe world, an illusory world, a world of illusion? Now, whatever age we are, we've all gone through difficult times in our life. We've all gone through traumas, and we've all seen how they passed in the past, and things that we thought were so incredibly important and so incredibly determinative of who we are and who we will become, we've seen them fade and be of no importance. And I don't have to go through those instances for each of us. You can go through them yourself. Make a checklist. How many of those things happened to you? And how many times did it happen to you? And how did you move on? Well, the fact is they happened. And the fact is you moved on. Now, some of us have lived through wars, and the wars passed, and we've moved on. Some of us have lived through abuse, and the abuse passed, and we moved on. Some of us have lived through low self-esteem, and then we saw that we could do things we never thought we could do, and we moved on. We need to constantly move on. But at the heart of all of this is we have to accept that this external world isn't real. And until we get to that point where we accept that this external world isn't real, we're not going to be able to get to the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem is everybody's talking about, but nobody's going to reality. And until we turn and face the truth and accept it and bring it into our being, we will continue to have all of the same problems that we constantly have. And we'll find freedom from these problems every once in a while because your situation will resolve itself. But guess what? Another one is going to come to replace it almost immediately. And once again, we're going to have to go through that same cycle of situation, need for resolution, expectation as to resolution, trauma when that expectation doesn't seem to come into being. These are things each of us has to realize. So we have to go deeper than our external life. We have to create another life within this life. We have to know that this body is not who we are. So when we ask ourselves, who am I? One of the answers is, we are not this body, and we're not the traumas and the difficulties and the aspirations of this body. This isn't who we are, and this isn't what we are about. And when we begin to realize truly who we are, truly where we came from, truly who truly what our real being is, will be able to shift from all of these qualities that are inappropriate for human beings. Imagine, instead of an elemental being, you are a light being. Does a light being need housing? Does a light being need wealth? Is a light being involved in wars? Is a light being involved in all of the traumas that this body is involved with? Can you hit yourself with a hammer as a light being and smash your fingers? None of these things are applicable. There's an entirely different way of life that is coming to each of us. And that's the life of a light being. And it's very difficult to imagine the existence of this light being while we are in this shell of elemental being. But you have all been told about this light being. And you've all been told that this shell will fade away and everything that it has been involved with will fade away. Yet, we continue to hold on to the illusory things that this shell considers important. And then we ask, why do I become angry? Why do I become sad? Why do I have periods of great joy that fade away from me? Why? Because we haven't accepted the truth, and we haven't accepted reality, and we haven't looked deeper, and we haven't detached ourselves from the illusory world. Upon detaching ourselves from the illusory world and not being so involved as to what will happen, this is when things will turn around for us. And we can't expect this to happen in a day or in a month or in a year, where many of us are in our 50s, 60s, 70s, and have been at this for a long time. Yet we still have the traumas of the world. Well, God has to help us. You see, we have to understand that alone, relying on ourselves, we aren't going to be able to resolve these situations. So we have to learn to surrender to truth and surrender to our Lord and surrender to his will and become intermingled with his will and his understanding. And what happens when that happens is you move from anger into mercy. You move from jealousy into love. You move from hatred into kindness. And when this occurs, that kindness and love and mercy that goes out towards others will also come towards you. So as you are able to detach yourself from that which isn't real, you will enter into the soothing world of truth and reality, where only mercy exists, where only kindness exists, where the cause of creation, which was love, exists. And then everything changes, because we don't just hear words, we see reality. And this needs to be our prayer. God, help us see reality. God, help us understand truth. God, take us away from all of the things that cause us trauma, which is an unreal determination of what things are about. We have to enter truth. We have to enter reality. The one thing that doesn't change, the one thing that doesn't die is truth. And as long as we are outside of truth, we are not going to understand reality. As long as we are outside of truth, we are subject to all of the things that happen when truth isn't present. And those things are all of the traumas of the world that come from the qualities that are satanic. So there has to be an internal change, and there has to be a way to make this change. There are stories of people who go to the Kaaba who pray for every feasible worldly good and every feasible manifestation for themselves of what's available in the world. People pray as if they were hoarders. But the truth is that the reality is the only place where you can be relieved of hoarding. Because with Allah, there is a cornucopia of wealth that is undiminishable. So we need to go from this world where things are scarce to the place where things are undiminishable. And the only way to do that is to stop our belief system in this illusory world and to ask Allah to help us understand truth and help us understand his qualities. So let us, when we pray, pray for these things. Pray for our transcendence from illusion to reality. Pray for transcendence from satanic qualities to godly qualities. Pray to be able to see truth as opposed to being blinded by illusion. Pray that the magnetism of illusion is released from us. Pray that the black spots that are attached to the glitters of illusion are taken away from us. Pray that we are made pure so that that which is real is where we reside. May that happen for each of us, and may each of us come to know reality. Ameen, ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.